Yeah, thanks, Tony. Appreciate it. So this is GitHub Actions, workflows in your repo. My name is Brian Jablonsky. Up on my screen, there is the github.com/bjablonsky/GitHub Actions-PCC 2021. If you want to go ahead and get any of these slides or any of the code examples, go ahead and grab that. I know everybody always asks that very first question. Are these slides available? Yes, they are. You can go to the GitHub and go ahead and grab it. So a quick little bit about me. My name is Brian Jablonsky. I have about 10 years of professional development experience, mostly in the .NET realm, doing .NET, ASP.NET web development. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I'm also the co-organizer of the New York City .NET Developers User Group. So if you're post-pandemic, if you're ever in the New York City area, we usually have it on the second Thursdays of the month, our meeting. We just started getting back into things. We've been, remote ever since COVID happened. So we're going to continue to be remote because the Microsoft offices that we're hosted at are still closed due to COVID. So, but yeah, if you're ever in the New York City area, please feel free to hit me up, and we'd love to grab coffee or a drink, or if you want to come by the New York City .NET Developers User Group, we'd always love to have you. You can also follow me on Twitter at Brian_Jablonsky, and you can get my GitHub at github.com/bjablonsky. So, what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about what GitHub Actions are, how they kind of work. And then we're going to go into a quick demo of creating a simple CI/CD pipeline. So we should take about 10 minutes to be able to set up a CI/CD pipeline. So you should not have an excuse of saying, well, CI/CD is too hard. I'm not going to be able to, I'm not going to be able to set it up. I can show you how to do one in about 10 minutes. So, and then we're going to talk about, going beyond just the simple CI/CD pipeline, what you can do with all the available features of GitHub Actions. So what are GitHub Actions? Well, it's an easy way to kind of automate your software workflows straight from GitHub and your repo. They are event-driven or schedule-driven. So an event can be something like, you're posting, you're pushing a commit or merging a pull request, or it can be scheduled, like, at a certain time of day you want something to kick off. So these GitHub Actions are workflows that can contain one or more jobs to be able to put together to be able to do your entire action. They can be scheduled or triggered by an event, and then you can create your own workflows and use or customize community-created actions and workflows to be able to help build everything out. So you don't have to build everything out. There's tons of already great community actions out there that you can go ahead and plug into your own GitHub Actions and create some powerful features. In fact, most of everything I'm going to show you today is all community driven. It's going to be a .NET application, so everything's going to be community driven of all the customized GitHub Actions out there. And basically, the nice thing about this is these workflows are stored as code in your GitHub repository. There's a folder called .github, and there's another folder inside this subfolder in there called workflows. And inside there's all of your YAML files, yet another markup language, for holding all of your GitHub Actions for if you want to do anything. So what's nice about this is, especially with your CI/CD solutions, sometimes you have to have your whole kind of configuration outside of your code. Nice thing about this, everything's in your code. So if you need to be able to do any changes or anything like that, that's all kind of recorded and changed as part of your repo. So you might say, well, hey, Brian, is this just another CI/CD tool out there? There's tons of them out there. There's Jenkins, there's Azure DevOps, there's AWS Code Pipelines, everything like that. Yeah, it's great for CI/CD, doing a CI/CD pipeline, but it can actually do a lot more than that. And it's tightly built into GitHub and how the GitHub universe works. And so obviously it supports things like workflow events such as like a pull request, kick off an action when a pull request happens, kick off an action when a push happens, when you create or delete a branch or a tag, when you do a deployment. But some kind of cool things is GitHub has these other features such as creating or updating a wiki page. You can actually now create an action off of that and kick off a whole workflow. So if you want to be able to capture maybe something and put it into a Word document and update, or on a share somewhere, you could probably do that if you want to. The other thing is integrating in with issues. So if you kick off an issue, you can go ahead and maybe do some things. If you want to update dashboards or send off emails or do whatever you want to do, you can kind of customize that. And there's also scheduling there as well. And there's tons of more different workflow events. You can go ahead and read all about it on the GitHub documentation. So you might ask, okay, great. You sold me. I use GitHub for my code repository and for my issues tracking. I already have a CI/CD tool. Let me migrate. Well, you don't have to migrate necessarily. If you have a CI/CD workflow that you're currently using, if you're using Jenkins, Azure DevOps, AWS code pipelines, you don't need to go ahead and migrate to GitHub Actions. If those tools fulfill your needs, go ahead and continue using them. There's no real reason to migrate over. The nice thing about this is you can actually use GitHub Actions in conjunction with your existing CI/CD tools and workflow tools. So you can have Jenkins doing your build and deployment process, and then you can have this doing for any kind of other things. If you want, like I said, updating your wiki pages or dealing with issues or anything like that. If you want to do additional actions on top of what your CI/CD tool already handles, you can go ahead and use GitHub Actions. So that's nice. So you don't necessarily need to migrate all the way over. And eventually, if you decide to say, hey, GitHub Actions is a really cool tool, I'm really comfortable with it, everything's great, go ahead and migrate into it. So we're going to get into how GitHub Actions work. And at the core of it, it's actually relatively simple. It's a workflow, and it's basically a YAML file. And then you execute that workflow in a runner based off of an event. So it's relatively simple. A lot of kind of like if you look at Azure DevOps or AWS code pipelines, kind of similar to it, where you can have maybe some code, code files where you can kind of define things to be able to kick off builds and go ahead and the tools be responsible for going ahead, kicking everything off and running all of your actions. So at the basis of it is a workflow, and workflow is basically a configurable automated process set up in your repository. And workflows are made up of one or more jobs, and those can be either scheduled or activated by an event. And they're basically just a YAML file that defines your workflow, and it lives in your root of your GitHub repo at the .github/workflows directory. And you can call it anything you want. I think for our example, we can call it build-and-deploy.yml. So we have that file. It's a simple text file that lives in the .github workflows folder in your repository. And that's where you kind of go ahead and configure everything. So you have your workflow, and then in your workflow, you have jobs. And this is basically just a set of steps that will execute on a same runner. And that basically can define dependency rules and how jobs run in the workflow, and you can basically run them in either parallel or sequentially. So it depends. If you're doing a bunch of testing across a bunch of different environments, you upgrade to .NET. You went from .NET Core 2.0 to .NET Core 3.0. You want to go ahead and test your application against Mac OS, Linux, Windows. Make sure everything tests and builds on all those machines. You can go ahead and run them in parallel, all these tests, to make sure everything builds and is fine. Or if you have dependencies where you got to build the file, you got to run your test, then you got to deploy it out to a environment, you can run things in sequentially. It's pretty straightforward. A lot of other CI/CD tools out there kind of use the same kind of pattern. So inside jobs, there are steps, and each step is kind of an individual task that can run commands, and these are called basically actions. And each step of the action is executed in the same runner. So that'll allow you to be able to go ahead and chain events if you want to. So then finally at the kind of core of it is the actions. And that is, that's just the smallest unit. These are the standalone commands. You can either create your own actions, if you're going ahead and in a Linux environment, you can type your own action, own command line actions if you want, or you can go ahead and use and customize the actions that are already out there from the community. And we'll actually use a lot of those in our demo. So basically, and then finally, that's kind of wrapping up all of the workflow in that file. And again, this is just a text file that you create. And then what you have is a runner. And basically, that's any machine with this special GitHub Action runner application installed. And that can either be hosted in GitHub, or you can actually host your own if you want to. So your runners are basically kind of job processors that sit there and wait for an available job. And then when GitHub says, hey, go ahead and execute this job. It goes ahead and runs it and reports the progress, logs, and results all the way back to GitHub, so you can have everything in a nice dashboard. And the only thing is that runners can only run one job at a time. So if you want to run multiple actions in parallel, or multiple jobs in parallel, you have to have multiple runners. So you can either, again, you can have a mixture of both hosted on GitHub, or you can have your own GitHub Actions runners hosted in your own environment. If you have a Kubernetes cluster or whatever you want, you can go ahead and have that in your own data center. So I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of limitations and stuff about GitHub Actions, but just kind of giving you a couple overview. There's some limitations about the job execution time, and whether they, it has to be less than 6 hours. If you're running on a GitHub hosted runner, if you're running your own self-hosted runner, you don't necessarily need, that limit doesn't apply to you, but overall it has to run within 72 hours, the entire workflow. There's API requests and job queue times. And kind of let's talk about some of the concurrent jobs. Basically, for the free plan, you can have up to 20 total concurrent jobs, 5 of those being a Mac OS job. So GitHub Actions, if you don't have any kind of Mac OS, you want to go ahead and test against Mac OS. Great news is that you have environments on GitHub Actions to be able to actually test out some of those things that you want to use. You basically can use up to 5 Mac OS jobs as part of your free plan. And Pro plan kind of upgrades that. Team and Enterprise goes ahead and ups all those maximums. And then basically, the most you can run is less than 256 jobs per whole workflow run. So don't get super crazy. So you might say, okay, cool. I'm on GitHub. I'm a paid user, or if you're a free user. I want to go. I don't have any kind of infrastructure set up. What's on the GitHub hosted runner? Well, there's kind of 3 different versions that they have. At the basis, they're all a 2-core CPU with 7 gigs of RAM and 14 gigs of storage space. So keep that in mind when you're kind of building out your steps and your actions. That if you're doing something super complex where you're going to need to eat through 30 gigs of RAM, you might want to look at going ahead and hosting your own runner, because the GitHub hosted runners will actually fail on you. So they have 3 different versions out there. The Windows supported version, so if you want to run any kind of Windows jobs, that is being run on a Windows Server 2019 server. Then they have the Linux versions, which actually have 3 different versions of Ubuntu. And only on Ubuntu, unfortunately, 20.04, 18.04, and 16.04. And then they actually have this Mac OS version that they will run, and that's only has Mac OS Catalina 10.15. So again, what's great about this is if your environment don't have everything set up, if you don't have Macs, if you don't have the budget to purchase Macs or anything, hey, you have some Mac support that you can use in GitHub. So that's kind of a super awesome thing. Might be saying, okay, cool. What's this going to cost me? For public repositories, it's free. It's pretty much unlimited. There'll probably be some soft limits if they start to see you using a lot, and they'll probably say, hey, you probably shouldn't be using that much. They'll probably reach out to and help you if there's some issues or anything like that. But usually, you're not really going to run into that for free projects anyway. For your kind of private repositories, obviously, there's different amount of minutes that are included. The free starts at 2,000. It goes all the way up to 50,000 minutes for the enterprise. And this is included per month per an account. So you might want to say, well, okay, what does per month per account mean? So basically, per month is per calendar days. Per account means whichever account owns that repository. So let's say, for example, I'm working in an organization and my organization owns 5 different repositories. Well, you don't necessarily have, let's say we're on the Pro plan, you don't necessarily have 3,000 minutes per repository, but because the overarching account goes ahead and owns all 5 of those repositories, it's going to be 3,000 minutes spread across all of those repositories. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. It's not per repository or per user or anything like that. Now, if you start getting kind of fancy and going ahead and assigning different users to different repositories, sure, it's basically per an account. So One other thing is they kind of have this thing called an OS runner multiplier, minute multiplier. So, basically running on a Linux machine, it's a 1-to-1. So running on a Linux machine, 1 minute costs 1 minute towards your time. Running on Mac OS, running 1 minute on the Mac OS runner will cost you 10 minutes against your pricing included minutes. And Windows, it's 2-to-1. So as you run, for every minute you run on Windows, you get charged 2 minutes to your account. And then there are overages costs. So if you can go ahead and go above this, and you can set limits and everything in GitHub. So it's not all of a sudden crazy that you get a $3,000 bill. So don't think that. But it's basically 0.8 of a penny per minute after you exhaust your included free minutes. So. The other thing is storage. So for public repositories, it's free. For private repositories, includes, again, 500 megs per an account. It goes all the way up to enterprises, up to 500 gigs. And that's for things like storing artifacts and storing certain actions and stuff like that. So you want to be able to reuse in your pipeline, not have to build out every time. And again, that's kind of that per account. And so this is actually not per month, but actually per an account for forever. So it's basically charged to the account that owns the repo, just like we were talking previously with the runners. And basically overage costs are about 25 cents per gigabyte. So you can go ahead and, a lot of times you're not really going to want to store a lot of artifacts in there. You'll probably, take those artifacts out, put them on somewhere else, like an S3 bucket or storage account on Azure or something like that to be able to store it and access it later. So I think these, as far as the pricing goes and what's included, it's relatively reasonable. I don't think you're really going to run into much there. So. All right, cool. Well, enough talk. Let's actually look at how we kind of create a CI/CD pipeline. So one of the first things is you got to make sure that GitHub Actions isn't enabled on your repo. So one thing is if your GitHub repo is managed by your organization, they may or may not have enabled GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions came out about a year ago-ish. So if they set this up previous, they may not, specifically enable that setting in your security setting in your repository. So you might have to ask your organization to be able to set it. If not, if you're creating new repositories on your own personal account, usually it's enabled right away. So let's go ahead and flip over. So here we go. Here's my GitHub Actions page. So this is, where I have the code and, the slides for this presentation. And this is just a GitHub repository. It's public. If I go over to here, I go to the settings page and I come down here. Yeah.
Would you please zoom in just a little bit?
Sure.
Thank you.
Let me try this. Hopefully I don't mess anything up with recording. Ooh, I thought I had set this. Oh, nope, that is the wrong monitor. Let's see, it's set to 150. Okie dokie.
Oh, that's awesome.
You'll have to excuse me because now everything's super huge. Oh, is that much better?
Yeah.
Okay, good. No problem. I know doing live streaming is always a little weird, so I can't see what you're seeing. So perfect.
Something that comes up. So you're doing great.
Thanks. So yeah, so you go to your your repository, go to your settings tab, and then you come down here on your left hand side and click on actions. And then this will basically show you the action permissions. I go ahead and say, go ahead and allow all the actions I want to do, regardless of who's authored it. You can, as you're, in a enterprise organization or in kind of the teams organizations, you can kind of have a little bit more granular settings here, but this is kind of on a free plan. And so you can go ahead and see that I can allow all actions. I can disable the actions if I don't want any actions for this repository, or I can enable some different settings as well. And go ahead and artifacts and log retention. And if you want to go ahead and set up your own self-hosted runners, you can go ahead and add it here and you can kind of learn more about that. It's a little bit beyond the scope of this. We're not going to really worry about setting up your own self-hosted runners. GitHub has some awesome documentation on being able to do everything. So you're thinking about doing it for your organization, definitely take a look at it. It's relatively easy to set up. So, all right, so great. We went ahead and made sure that GitHub Actions is enabled. Now we're going to go ahead and create a workflow YAML file in the .github/workflows folder in the root of our repository. So let's swap back over here. And for sake of time, I've already created, I've already created a YAML file that I call build and deploy. As you can see, this is in my GitHub/workflows folder in my repository folder. And so now we're going to go ahead and build this out. So we're going to go switch back over to the slides. And so now we're going to go ahead and name our workflow. So in this case, we use the kind of nomenclature name, whatever you want to use. So in this case, I said build and deploy an ASP.NET Core application to Azure Web Apps. So next, we're going to go ahead and define an event that we want GitHub Actions to fire off on. And so for this, example, we can go ahead and push on when the branch. It's actually since this has changed slightly, since GitHub now does main as the default branch. I should probably change that to main instead of master. But basically, whenever I make a push to the main branch, it'll go ahead and fire this off. And obviously, you can do all kinds of different event notifications, such as when you do a pull request, when you push to your dev branch, when you do anything you want, you can go ahead and create all kinds of different ones. For the sake of simplicity, we're just going to say, hey, I'm going ahead and pushing to master. There's no real kind of GitHub workflow or Git workflow that I've created in this, just for ease of examples. So after that, you kind of will build out your job. And so this job, we're going to call build and deploy. And for this job, we're going to have it run on Ubuntu because this is .NET Core. So why not run on Linux to be able to build everything out? It's cheaper than running on Windows or Mac OS. Again, those runner minutes, 2 to 1 for Windows and then a 10 to 1 for Mac. So Linux is 1 to 1. Nice thing is .NET Core runs on Linux, so let's build on Linux. So from there, we can go ahead and create out some steps to be able to check out the code, then build and kind of test my project. So you can see here I've defined the steps action right here, and then I have a bunch of different steps down here. And so here I have the name checkout code. So it's just something you can be able to see when kind of running through the workflow, you kind of see these kind of better names. So in this case, I go ahead and use the default actions action called checkout. And basically what this is a GitHub community action out there that GitHub created that goes to GitHub, checks out your code for you. So perfect. So again, remember, this is all running on the same machine. And basically as these steps run, this is just kind of a scripts of telling you what steps to run. All the steps kind of have all the data that you need. And so our next step is set up .NET Core. So we have a Linux machine. They don't have any kind of built-in runtime environments here. So what we got to do is go ahead and set up .NET Core. Again, we have some amazing community actions here already for us to go ahead that downloads the .NET SDK, .NET Core SDK, goes ahead, runs everything it needs to do, and sets everything up. Then you can see here, I actually will pass in a variable called .NET version because I'm using .NET 3.1. .NET Core 3.1 instead of .NET 2 or .NET 1 or now .NET 5. So they have I pass in the .NET version and say, I want the 3.1 latest. I don't care. You can actually, if you want to specify a specific version of the .NET version, you can. So that's great for, hey, if you're trying to test this build against multiple different versions of .NET, making sure that nothing is broken with your compile. So that's kind of a great thing. Then from there, we're going to do your regular kind of .NET restore. So we do .NET restore, I point to my solution file. Then I go ahead and do my build, .NET builds. I configure it to be released because we're going to go ahead and push this eventually up to Azure. And I just basically say no restore because we already did the .NET restore for the NuGet packages and point to my solution file. Finally, at the end, I can add in some tests. So let's go ahead and actually switch over to our code. And let's, first, let's look at our kind of project. So we'll go ahead and build this project out. give it a few minutes to build. And go ahead and start debugging. To give it a few seconds to fire up. And there you go. So it's, it's just a very standard run-of-the-mill, ASP.NET Core web app. So, okay, great. So now let's go through our build file down here, and we'll go ahead and again, we're going to uncomment some of this stuff because for sake of time, I want to have to type all this out because that would be boring. So we'll go ahead and go all the way up to the build. So we'll go ahead and save that. I'll jump over to GitHub here and go see all my changes that I've made. I said update my GitHub Actions YAML file to build. Go ahead and commit that to main. We're going to go ahead and push that. And then we're going to swap over here to our GitHub Actions. So you can go over here to GitHub Actions and click on the Actions. And let's make sure. Yep. I need to update my GitHub desktop. That's why that ends up popping up. Basically says, you're trying to change a GitHub Actions file. You're sure you want to do that, and you basically have to authorize. So you might see that if you haven't updated. So you can now see here's my builds commit. Update my GitHub Actions YAML to the file to build. So here's my code. Click on Actions. Click on all workflows. Now I can actually click into this, and you can see here's my job that I had defined here. Again, this is my job, build and deploy. So there you go, and I can click on that, and I can go ahead and see everything that's running through. So you can see it went ahead and set everything up. It checked out my code. It set up .NET Core, and all these kind of nice little sections here kind of very much correspond to what I named thing. Check out code, set up .NET Core, install dependencies, build. So check out code, set up .NET Core, install dependencies. Here's the output of .NET Restore, and then you can see the builds. Everything built, it succeeded, perfect, and we're good. So it goes ahead and does some cleans up and says everything's done. And you can go back to the summary here, and you can see that everything was successful, and it took about 40 seconds to work. And so you can go to your actions and see a list of all of your actions that had previously run. So perfect. So you can see that was 5 minutes of time to go ahead and start setting that up. So let's now jump back over to our slides. And we built it. Now let's actually look at running tests. So we have some tests in our GitHub Actions here. So I have basically two tests: a successful test and an error test. For this one, we're going to say result is equal to 3, just to show that when there's an error with tests that you can go ahead and see it in your GitHub Actions. We can go ahead and save that. Also in our build and deploy, we're going to go ahead and add our .NET test. So we're going to name this step .NET, or name our step test, and we're going to run the .NET test, and we're going to go ahead and point to our solution. So go ahead and save that. We can go ahead over here to GitHub, and you see we modified our YAML file, and we modified our unit test. So updated GitHub Actions with tests. Go ahead and commit that. Go ahead and push it. All right, and then let's now hop back over here. And hopefully, there we go. Updated GitHub Actions with the tests. We can now dig into here, and it'll probably take about 40 seconds for it to kick off and to get everything done. In the meantime, are there any kind of questions while we're waiting?
Yeah, I had a question.
Yeah.
I noticed like the cost in runner minutes for using GitHub Actions locally is, you know, a lot more. What's the advantages? Like, is it worth it basically for the extra cost?
To run the GitHub runner locally?
The GitHub Actions locally, yeah. Because like with Mac, it's 10 times the amount.
Right. So again, there's kind of two versions of the GitHub runner. There's the GitHub hosted one, which GitHub manages all the infrastructure for you. And then there's a local one, which you can either run locally on your machine, or you can run it on a server or anything like that in your infrastructure. So if you're running it in your infrastructure, there's no cost to it. So if you're running a Mac OS, if you have Mac OS in your infrastructure, and you can install the GitHub runner on that and run it against that, you're not using up any of your GitHub hosted minutes. It's basically meant for, hey, if an organization is kind of being lean and mean about things, and you want to not worry about having an infrastructure and having to configure runners and do all that kind of infrastructure, GitHub does that automatically for you. It's kind of like the serverless version of it. Does that kind of make sense? So if you have your own Mac OS machine that you can install your runner on in your infrastructure, it doesn't cost anything.
Okay, so it's just like I'm gonna pay more to take some of the hassle out, basically.
Exactly. It's serverless. So
Okay.
everybody always pays a little bit more for serverless. So
All right, cool. Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. So yeah, that does, if you're running on your own runners, it doesn't cost towards your minutes. So it's only the GitHub hosted runners that will account towards your minutes. So, and you can have hybrid versions. So you can have, for example, let's say you don't have Mac OS in your infrastructure at all, but you have your Kubernetes infrastructure for your development, and you can go ahead and fire up a container to host your build environment. Well, cool, great. Go ahead and use that as your own GitHub, your own runner, and then in conjunction, you use the GitHub hosted Mac OS runner. So you can use both. So just because you're using your own runner, it doesn't count towards the minutes that you GitHub hosted. So that's kind of a nice thing. So if you're only running Linux, or you're only running Windows, or you're not running Mac OS at all, you can go ahead and utilize that. So that's kind of the really nice thing about it. So
Yeah, and so then that just covers for your users that use Mac OS, kind of.
right. So if you don't have any Mac OS machines, and you're trying to build against a Mac OS machine. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, like, let's say I'm a developer and I have a Mac Pro as my developing machine, but my server machines are Linux. You probably want to go ahead and build your code and deploy everything and do all your testing on Linux, because that's eventually where your code is going to end up in that environment. So it doesn't necessarily mean that just because I'm running Mac OS on my laptop doesn't mean that I would use a Mac OS runner.
Okay.
It's only for if you want to use it in that environment. So, for example, if you're part of your build process, you might want to make sure that it builds on Mac OS, because people might need to use it for Mac OS.
Gotcha.
So,
all right, that's really helpful. Thank you.
yeah, great, yeah. So cool. So as we can see, we ran the .NET tests. We went ahead, ran some tests, and we had 2 tests, one passed and one failed. So you can go ahead and see that part of the process, everything was smooth up until we went ahead and ran our test, and we went ahead and had a failure. So now we can see it. We can set up things to be able to send out emails to yourself, to raise alerts and stuff like that. So whenever these, build job fails, you'll get an alert. So let's go ahead and jump back into our code, and let's fix that. So go ahead and fix that, save it. So obviously 2 is equal to 2, so we don't get an error. Go ahead and fix to test, commit, push. And it should be, go back to the summary page. Go back to the actions. You can see fix the unit test, and hopefully in 40 or so seconds, we'll see that be successful. But in the meantime, while waiting for that, let's go ahead and jump forward. We want to publish this project to Azure as an Azure web app. So we got to add some additional steps to be able to go ahead and publish our project and then add it to Azure. So one of the things, next thing you want to do is when you are kind of publishing your application, you want to run the .NET publish, which goes ahead and takes all of your binaries and all of your configuration files, everything, static asset files, and everything you need, and dumps it into a directory. So in this case, we're using .NET publish. We're using the configuration of release because we don't want, our web config to have debugging enabled. We're going to push it out to an output directory called /myapp, and we're going to point it to the GitHub Actions solution file. Then from there, we're going to add another step. We're going to call that run Azure web app deploy action using the publish profile credentials. So with this, we're actually Azure has created a community action out there to be able to deploy your web app. So they've taken all of the nitty gritty out of it and has really made it streamlined. So basically, all we got to do is we got to pass in kind of three variables. One is the app name that we're going to use, in this case, GitHub Actions, PCC 2021, a publish profile, and you'll see here, this is a little bit thing. So the publish profile includes some secrets. So you might say, well, yeah, well, I want to include passwords and secrets inside of my YAML file. This is just a plain text file. If anybody has access to my GitHub repository, they can end up seeing this. Or if they, I accidentally email this out, it's not good. It's bad security to be able to expose secrets like that out. So one of the nice things is GitHub actually has secrets built in. And so using this kind of syntax, the $, squiggle bracket, secrets dot Azure web app publish profile, what we'll do is actually go out to GitHub, grab the secret, and go ahead and inject it here while you're going through the build process. So let's actually hop over real quick. And as you can see, the unit test went ahead and built and was successful. Let's actually go ahead over to GitHub and look at the GitHub Action secrets. So if you go to your repository, go to your settings, and come down here to secrets, you can see there's this thing called action secrets. And this is basically a set secrets for your environment variables that need to be encrypted to be able to go ahead and use them in your GitHub Actions. There's environment secrets, and then there's repository secrets. For this case, we're going to use repository secrets. So you can go ahead and you can add a new repository secret up here. We've already added one. So we can click update here. And basically, I called it Azure _ web app _ publish _ profile. You can call it whatever you want. And then you go ahead and paste in the value. Now, with Azure web apps, so let's quickly look at our Azure web app. I have an Azure web app sitting up here. This is just a .NET Core. This is basically the same application. I went ahead and right-clicked and said publish from here, which is, everybody tells you don't do right-click publish, but for sake of this example, we're going to show that we publish this app. This is the same thing that we saw before. Welcome. And so one of the things is you need to get this published profile. And so on your Azure Web App Service, you click this little button right here. This is get your published profile. You download it. Well, I don't know why it's failing to download, but let's see. Probably gotta refresh my session. There we go. So we go ahead and download it. And then we can open up in a text file, go ahead and copy everything. This contains secrets, so I'm trying not to expose out any kind of sensitive data. And then we'll go ahead back over to GitHub Actions and go ahead and just paste that all in, and we would update the secret. In this case, I don't want to do that because I already have all the secrets updated, and giving demos, something might break if I go ahead and try to update it. So, all right, let's, so we went ahead and did that. So let's jump back over to our PowerPoint. And basically, we're going to say we pass in this other variable called package, and that's where your code kind of lives. And this basically, this package file is, this variable is going to be the same as where you did your .NET Publish output. So that's relatively easy. So we said about adding secrets. And so now let's actually look at deploying it. So let's jump back over to our code. And let's go to our index page and let's add h2 hello Philly.net Code Camp 2021. We'll save that. And we'll go into our build and deploy, and we'll go ahead and, for sake of time, we'll go ahead and uncomment all this. So as you can see, we have GitHub Actions. That was the app name. That app name will coincide with the app name that we have here. GitHub Actions. This is the app name up here. This is the resource group. This is the app name up here. And we have already our secrets published to our secrets in our GitHub. And we have everything set. So we'll go ahead and save that. Jump back over here to GitHub and say added Azure Web App Deploy. Philly.net. Go ahead and commit to main. And we'll go ahead and push that. Yeah, and this is just because I have an older version of GitHub Desktop I need to update for permissions. So it just wants to go ahead and make sure that everything's good. I didn't update it because I didn't want to possibly break something. So, all right, so now let's jump back over to our repository. And let's look at our GitHub Actions. So we should be seeing, an added Azure Web Deploy. So let's kind of dive into that. Again, that's going to take like 30, 40 seconds to kind of go through the build process, the test process, and hopefully we'll go ahead and deploy this out to Azure. In the meantime, let me check I see there is somebody that had mentioned something. Oh, very nice. Okay. So we'll give it a couple more seconds. Is there any other questions in the meantime while we wait for this to build?
I always have questions.
All right, great. Yeah, perfect.
For GitHub Actions, do you see like a certain type of group using it more than others? And what I mean by this is like, do you think public repos and open source uses it more than private or proprietary, or vice versa? Or do you think it's like kind of just a universal thing?
I would think it's more of a universal thing. Now, I will say probably public repos will probably use it a lot more because, again, if you have a public repo on GitHub, it's now built in. You don't have to worry about any kind of other infrastructure. And it's free. It's free. That's what's the nice thing. So that's, GitHub loves open source. So they always try to, anything that's open source, to go ahead and enable open source developers to kind of do what they need to do without having to secure, back in the day when, back in SourceForge days, I'm dating myself here, but SourceForge days before GitHub and Git was out there, you had to figure out how you would deploy, how would you deploy and build all this stuff. And so part of all that is you'd have to, either get kind of sponsorship by a company or you'd have to pay it for yourself. And if you're a maintainer and somebody's going ahead and committing a whole bunch of commits to your code, it's going to hurt your wallet. And so what's nice about this is, hey, everything's kind of free out there. On the other side, I wish GitHub Actions was available about a year before they released it. Because I was responsible at a previous job for taking, we were on Heroku and some co-managed Windows Server boxes, and we decided to move over to AWS. And so I was responsible for kind of doing that migration. And so I had to go ahead and learn AWS code pipelines and build everything up. It was a little bit more of a pain than I wanted it to be. Seeing, once I saw GitHub Actions, I was like, wow. What took me weeks to kind of configure and get everything up and running would have taken me like 2 days, and I would have been done.
You're like, my job would have been so much easier.
Right.
Right.
So It's good. As things more and more things come. We were using GitHub for our code repository and for our issues tracking and for project planning and with our Kanban board and everything like that. So we had everything kind of already in there. We just didn't have a CI/CD pipeline, and we were using Heroku primarily for our CI/CD pipeline, and things were getting a little bit more expensive. So we decided, hey, we have a CI/CD pipeline with Heroku already, but we don't have a CI/CD pipeline with our kind of Windows co-managed servers, and so it was kind of a mishmash. We'd always have to right-click deploy, and that's not always great. We don't have artifacts. We had to make sure we copied, do manual deployments and back things up. So it was a bit of a process. People make mistakes. I've made a mistake where I've deployed something out and I forgot to include something. So it happens. Or I've overwritten something and we don't know that all the environments, our testing environment is the same as our production environments and stuff like that, because things can get deployed out in different different feature branches. So
I've been told that you're not like officially indoctrinated into development until you break prod.
Exactly. Yes.
Someone I know where they work, they buy a bottle of champagne the first time somebody breaks prod. So yeah.
Nice. Right. I like that idea.
Okay, cool. That answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's get back to our build and deploy process. So we went ahead and ran the Azure Web App deploy. You can see it packaged things up, deployed things out. Hopefully, fingers crossed, if I hit refresh, we will see our updated website. And we do. We see we added the Hello Philly.NET Code Camp 2021. So, in the basis of things, if you look at this, this is how many lines? This is 42 lines. And in about 15 minutes, I've went through building a simple CI/CD pipeline, going ahead from building it up from doing our builds, doing our testing, and doing our deploying. And there's, you might say, well, okay, I'm on AWS, I'm on certain other infrastructure. The Azure Web Apps deploy, GitHub action out there that Microsoft maintained doesn't apply to me. It's probably going to take me much longer. Well, actually, if you go ahead and go to the github.com/marketplace and click on the actions, there are tons of actions out there. You can see there's 6,800 actions, and it's ever growing. I think when I started giving this presentation a while ago, it was like 3,000. Now it's up to 6,800. So there's all kinds of stuff. So if you search for AWS, there's all kinds of AWS actions that are created by Amazon to be able to, go ahead and deploy out to your ECS cluster and or to your EKS or whatever you want to do. And so there's also nice, great actions that are created by third-party vendors out there. So if you're not, you'll probably have a workflow similar to what somebody else has a workflow, and you can go ahead and use these other actions to help your life make it a lot easier. So cool. Let's get back to the slides. So we went ahead and deployed. So perfect. So now we create a simple CI/CD pipeline. What can we do more now? Well, we're going beyond this kind of simple workflow. Well, one thing is you can end up using environment variables for configurable workflows. So you can, inject certain environment variables in, where you go into prod, whether you go into test or a certain other environment or whatever you want to do. You can go ahead and inject these variables into it, so that's a little bit more configurable. You can also use something called build matrices to be able to test across multiple systems, platforms, language. That's what I was talking about. Hey, if you are deploying this application to multiple versions of .NET, make sure it builds in multiple versions of .NET Core, or being able to run on the Mac OS environment or whatever you want to do. You can end up building up these build matrices to be able to test across all of those kind of in various systems and platforms and stuff like that. So that's kind of hugely nice. You can go ahead and make sure that, as you're updating things are not breaking. So what you can do is, hey, I want to eventually target .NET 5, but I'm on .NET 3. So you can slowly start to upgrade some things and make sure that you're not breaking your .NET 3, build, but also make sure that your .NET 5 is working, or if you need to regress back from .NET 5 to .NET 3, .NET Core 3.0, that you can go ahead and kind of do some testing and stuff like that. So that's great. The other thing is you can create kind of complex workflows that utilize existing workflows and jobs. You can kind of cascade this, build something simple, and then you can go ahead and reuse that for other projects. So that's kind of nice. And then you obviously can create these workflow templates. So you can go ahead and see all these actions you can bundle up and go ahead and expose it out, have variables that you can pass in and out. And you can go ahead and, again, reuse that throughout your organization. Give these workflow templates, as you're creating anytime you create a new repository, you can create, as you're working through your repository, you can say, hey, I'm building a .NET app. So give you the, your .NET Core YAML workflow template already in there. So when your developers are going ahead and doing their development, they have everything already kind of predefined for you, so they don't have to kind of copy and paste and figure everything out. So that's a nice feature. The other thing is you can also cache dependencies and store these artifacts to make your workflows run more efficiently. Looking back to the kind of doing the build matrices, you don't want to have to build the project every single time that you're maybe testing on different environments. So you just build it once, and then you can run it multiple places. It's .NET Core, so you can go ahead and build in .NET Core and then run that anywhere that you want to, whether Mac OS, Linux, Windows, wherever. So you can go ahead and store those artifacts, so you don't have to waste time rebuilding each of those artifacts in each one of those environments. So the other thing is you can host your own runners. So you can go ahead and have all your build process and all your tools go ahead and installed on your machine. Then you just have to run the commands. You actually have to go ahead and waste time of installing .NET Core, installing if you have Selenium or any other kind of third-party packages that you need to use. You can already have that built up in your let's say you build a container image. You can already have that built up. With the GitHub Actions, you can spin up those runners as much as you need, or kind of scale them down as much as you need. So there's tons of great options. So, and then like I said, you can kind of build your own actions. And one of the right now, GitHub offers you two different ways to build your actions. One is just using plain JavaScript. You can just write JavaScript to be able to build your action. Another one is to be able to use Docker to run on Linux and to be able to build up your Docker container if you have specialized tools that you need to use. And then JavaScript can run on Linux, Mac OS, or Windows. So the Docker containers are only for Linux, and then JavaScripts you can run on basically Linux, Mac, or Windows if you need to access some certain things. And this is basically actions that you want to go ahead and publish out as part of your workflow. If you have runners and stuff running on your own infrastructure, you don't necessarily have to worry about that. Your containers only run on Linux, and you can have a container if you want running Windows. And you can have all that fun of building up a container environment that runs on Windows. So yeah. So here's some additional information. So there's the link to my slides. There's GitHub Actions docs. That's all the documentation on it. And then there's a nice little learning lab, and I'm going to jump back over here and kind of go through some of these. So real quick side things, here's the GitHub action that I was using. That was by Microsoft from Azure. This is the Azure web app, and it tells you how to go ahead and use end-to-end samples of how to go ahead and do everything I just did. So here's the GitHub Actions docs. You can go ahead and go through and learn a lot more if you're doing Python or Ruby or Java, .NET, whatever you're doing, PowerShell. You have tons more examples here and tons more, especially like the workflow and how events that triggers workflows. You can see there's tons of triggers that go ahead for those events. So I just covered one is just checking in code. And then they have this cool little lab, GitHub training, creating a GitHub Actions, kind of like what I did from the ground up. So you can definitely go ahead and run through that to kind of get your feet wet and set up your first kind of GitHub Actions. Obviously all of my code is available in GitHub, so you can go to my GitHub and get the slides or the source code as well. So